Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of Washington. 4 men were arrested earlier today for conspiracy to harass and threaten journalists and members of the Anti-Defamation League who were openly critical of their neo-Nazi movement to which all 4 defendants belonged. One of them, Cameron Brandon Shea, was arrested in the Seattle area early this morning. All 4 defendants will be prosecuted in this district by my office. These neo-Nazis called their group Atomwaffen, which is the German phrase for atomic weapon, and they vowed to accelerate the collapse of civilization using violence, mass murder, hate, and threat. The First Amendment protects all manner of speech, even speech that to most of us is hateful, vile, based on ignorance, and offensive. But the First Amendment does not protect speech if it's accompanied by acts that are taken in furtherance of that hatred and the intent to intimidate and incite violence. Attorney General Barr has made it clear to the U.S. attorney community and to the public at large that such acts of hate will be met with thorough, tireless, vigorous investigations and aggressive criminal prosecutions. Those of us assembled here intend to keep that promise. This investigation involved coordinated arrests, search warrants, and multiple federal districts located in Washington, Texas, Arizona, and Florida. I especially want to call out the dedication and hard work of our DOJ, Department of Justice colleagues in Tampa, Florida. They have been truly full partners every step of the way in this matter. Importantly, I want to call out the people who are standing here with me this morning. I have to my left FBI Special Agent in Charge Ray Duda. To my immediate right, I have Deanna Nolet, the Assistant Chief for the Seattle Police Department, and the United States Postal Investigative Service, Ketty Larco, here from Seattle. What I want to mention is that they are all members of a group called the Joint Terrorism Task Force, JTTF for those of us that spend a lot of time there. The sole mission, the sole goal, the sole purpose of the Joint Terrorism Task Force is to root out precisely this type of hate crime. Significantly, the agents, officers, and the offices that they represent ensure that not only have these 4 defendants been brought to justice to answer for their acts, but that those who were targeted by this hatred were kept safe and kept informed to the fullest extent possible. The entire community owes the folks standing here with me and the folks standing in their offices an incredible debt of gratitude. I'd also like to lastly call out Assistant United States Attorney Tom Wood to my office to the far right. He's with our Terrorism and Violent Crimes Unit. He carried the laboring oar on the prosecution side of this. He poured over evidence. He collaborated with agents, officers, other federal districts, and it's his legal work in hand-in-glove cooperation with the law enforcement community that got us where we are today. So thank you, Tom. Before I turn this over to Special Agent in Charge Ray Duda, I want to direct your attention to one particular poster. And it's this one right here that sort of exemplifies and gives you a better frame of what you may not be able to see in the written complaint. And if you look here, what you'll see is the press badge targeted at a journalist here in our community, Death to Pigs. Imagine waking up some morning and finding this at your house. With that, I'll turn it over to Special Agent in Charge Ray Duda. Thank you. And after Ray Duda speaks, we'll entertain any questions you may have.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Today, the FBI took an important step in countering what is seen as the top domestic terrorism threat facing our nation today, racially motivated violent extremism. FBI Joint Terrorism Task Forces throughout the country are engaged in ongoing law enforcement operations at this time to disrupt the illegal activity of the individuals charged today and to collect evidence regarding this plot. The subject arrested here this morning and the other subjects arrested around the country posed a legitimate and escalating threat to anyone who dared counter or try to expose their activities. These subjects first came to our attention in 2018. They utilize the internet and social media to spread their message and make their plans. As the group expanded, they participated in military-style training and hate camps. Investigating them wasn't easy. The subjects took steps to conceal their identities and their activities, both online and in real life. But in coordination with FBI field offices around the country and our state and local partners, we were able to determine the group had gone from rhetoric to the commission of illegal acts. The FBI recognizes all citizens' First Amendment protected rights. However, the subjects arrested today crossed the line from protected ideas and speech to illegal acts of intimidation and coercion against the individuals that they perceived as a threat to their ideology of hate. If the objective of these subjects was to send a message intimidating the recipients into silence, to them I say the FBI has our own message for you. We will not stand by idly while you attempt to undermine the freedoms for which our nation stands. This case should serve as an example of the FBI's dedication to working domestic terrorism and combating violent extremism. As I mentioned above, the success of today's enforcement action involved a lot of moving parts from all over the country. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge the Houston, Phoenix, and Tampa FBI field offices, as well as our local partners from throughout the Puget Sound region. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge these agencies on stage here today: the Seattle Police Department, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, who played a major role in this investigation through their participation in the Seattle Joint Terrorism Task Force. Thank you.
And with that, we'll open it up to questions.
Can you give us specific?
Sir?
Could you identify which journalists or outlets, and is Shea related to Matt Shea?
As to your second question, I don't know the answer to that question. Tom Woods may. I do not believe so. As to your first question, I really don't want to mention that journalist's name here. I'm aware that it may be out there, available in public news media, but I'd prefer not to mention it at this time.
Just to be clear, was a specific journalist communicated with by this group, or was it more they were preparing these sort of mock-ups for possible intimidation?
He was targeted and had received the communication of a threat.
Mail? Can you be more specific about how, like, was it in the mail? Was it in person?
It was in the mail, I believe, in this instance.
How was that journalist targeted? Was he targeted because he previously reported on him, or how was he singled out?
Correct. That journalist had produced a number of pieces critical of Atomwaffen, exposed their sort of military-style training. I believe, and I could check with Tom Woods, but I believe several of these videos were on YouTube for a period of time, were taken down, but the journalist did a very comprehensive expose of their activities.
So the other, the two to the right, from my right, who were members of the Anti-Defamation League, the targets of those two posters?
I defer to.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay. And then the second question is: this case is really about intimidation. Where does this go from here? Is this the end of it, or is there more we could expect?
In terms of these four defendants?
Yeah.
Or
even others.
This is the start line. The charges may change, evolve over time as we analyze evidence. As I mentioned, there were a number of search warrants that were executed. Assistant United States Attorney Tom Woods will be processing that, but we will, at this point, I'd say it's a starting line. It's not a finishing line.
Are there other suspects who have not been arrested yet, or is this investigation ongoing? Can you give us some idea of how extensive Atomwaffen may be here in Washington? I mean, there's been reporting on it. We keep hearing about it. They arrested Caleb Cole earlier on other charges. It sounds like they're a presence here, and I'm wondering if you guys can give us some idea of just how big of a presence.
I think I'd defer to the FBI, Special Agent in charge at this.
Absolutely. As noted in the complaint, there are individuals that interacted with the charged individuals that have not yet been identified. So this is an ongoing investigation. As I mentioned, the particular locations that I mentioned, there are additional locations throughout the country where we are continuing to do investigative action, such as interviews, surveillance, etc. So this is an active, ongoing investigation.
There was a case, I think, unsealed today in Eastern Virginia, that involves some similar allegations. Is it at all related? Are there crossover characters here? Or are we looking at two separate federal investigations that may merge at some point?
I guess I would say we were certainly aware of it. The timing is not pure coincidence, but I don't want to comment on any nexus to the Eastern District of Virginia. That was a swatting case involving an Atomwaffen member. But don't want to certainly make any statements, assertions, or inferences that there's a connection to the 4 defendants we have in custody.
What's the FBI's estimate of how large this group is nationally?
Again, we don't investigate groups. We investigate individuals that we've identified within those groups that have broken the law. So I cannot comment on the size.
Without saying you're investigating the group, you must have some idea whether this is a network that's bigger or smaller, whether or not they're per se that.
Yes, I don't want to get into specific numbers. I will say that the network is clearly throughout the United States. We have investigative activity from the East Coast to the West Coast, ongoing.
Would it help if there was JTTF, you've got an international terrorism statute, 2332 or whatever it is. Would it help if there were a domestic terrorism statute, and maybe how that would look? Would that enable you to expand these investigations beyond individual crimes? And is that something that the DOJ or the U.S. Attorney's Office is?
Yeah, in my former life, I spent a lot of time in Olympia. I never would want to hazard a guess as to what legislation looks like when it comes out at the end of the process as opposed to the beginning. We believe we have the tools we need in this instance. I have no comment on additional congressional activity or actions. We'd certainly be interested in seeing what is proposed, but I'm not prepared to comment on additional tools that we need at this time.
So you're left to sort of piecemeal these individuals as they cross the line?
I wouldn't say piecemeal. We have some pretty aggressive criminal statutes that we can bring to bear. There's mail fraud, wire fraud, cyber stalking. So I think piecemeal really indicates, to me at least, that they're insufficient. That's certainly not the case here.
Agent Duty, you described this racially motivated violence as the top domestic terrorist threat facing the country. Can you talk about, has there been a rise in neo-Nazi activity? Has there been a rise in violence associated with that? Talk about that in terms of just trends.
We've definitely seen a rise in violence associated with these groups. FBI Director Wray recently testified regarding this increase in activity. The violence associated with these groups has surpassed the violence associated with groups that we deem international terrorism groups here in the United States. So it has risen to the forefront in our terrorism fight here domestically.
And describe the effort in getting these 4 individuals. You said that they were hiding their identities. Give me how elaborate they were going about concealing their identities and their activities.
Reluctant to get into specifics about the case. Referenced in the affidavit is the use of encrypted apps to communicate, which is a very much a challenge for us in law enforcement. That is an example of how they actively chose to conceal their activity.
Can you discuss any more, because the complaint clearly has a lot of quotes and excerpts from these encrypted chats. Can you talk a little bit about how you were able to get those?
I can't get into that.
I'd just like a little more information about possibly how large of a footprint Atomwaffen has here in Washington State. I know you mentioned you can't get into numbers, but was Washington State home to any of these military-style training camps or hate camps?
Again, that would get into the investigative details. I'm not prepared to do that at this time.
You have obviously, you're seeking to well publicize this. We have these boards that are out there. Obviously, there's more to come. We're talked about the national problem and the rise in these kinds of groups and their kind of activities. What is the message that you're really trying to get out here today going forward?
I think the message is the way I started my comments, that this should serve as a warning to these groups that the FBI is taking this threat to our country very seriously, that this is not a recent surge in investigative activity. This is the culmination, or at least the stage that we have reached in this particular investigation. So this is not recent activity, but these cases are starting to come to fruition here. We referenced the Eastern District.
Specifically to Atomwaffen, do we know when they sort of gelled together under that, how long they've been around?
I don't have that specific information. This particular group came to our attention in 2018.
Okay.
Could I tag on to that briefly? I would echo everything that Agent Duda said. What's the message? Certainly that's the message. They'll also be aggressively prosecuted where they're found. This is a tremendous success. It's distressing that this sort of activity exists in this society, but this is a tremendous success in that they were stopped, apprehended, investigated, and arrested, and will face prosecution before something much, much worse could happen. And I really can't emphasize enough how this is not a U.S. Attorney, Department of Justice, FBI roadshow. This was incredibly important that the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and that's why these cooperations and task forces are so critically important in these investigations.
How much could these guys face for just sending basically and posting threatening letters?
I'll defer to Tom.
Yeah, right now the complaint has a single charge. That
Can you go to
carries-
the mic? Maybe the machines won't hear you. Yeah.
Right now, the complaint has a single charge. It carries a statutory maximum of 5 years. It's standard practice in this district to include only a single charge in the complaint. So in other words, additional charges should be forthcoming.
Can you say if it was of any help to you to have these, the ERPO order against Cole and the subsequent weapons charges when he was found in, the presence of weapons in Texas? Did that play any role in any of this?
Well, the ERPO, the Extreme Risk Protection Order, which is what an ERPO is, it's a civil proceeding for people that don't quite rise to the level of criminal conduct, but they clearly present a danger to the community. They can be hailed before court and have weapons taken from them, as Mr. Cole did. I believe it was in September or October of last year. Incredibly important. That disrupted him for a time being. Don't know that it disrupted him for all time. But those tools are incredibly important. It's a way to trip somebody up and perhaps prevent an act of violence rather than chasing an act of violence.
Is there a message today? Do you believe that these arrests will cripple Atomwaffen?
I'll take that. Again, our objective is not to investigate groups. We investigate those individuals. This particular group of individuals that absolutely has disrupted their activities, and as I stated, this investigation is ongoing. There are others that could be charged as part of this conspiracy, but referencing the group as a whole, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to answer that.
Last question. What's the concern that it moves from these flyers to physical intimidation, threats, and even violence?
Absolutely. This group, as stated in the affidavit, other members of this group have been charged with murder. There are a number of those situations outlined in the affidavit. So other members of this group have shown the propensity to take very serious acts of violence. And so, again, the charges are the threats and the intimidation, but it would be irresponsible for us to not address those, as these individuals have the means and the ability to carry out those acts.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.